Hello, and welcome to Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Wurl. The topic today, the role of emotions in contextual targeting on CTV. I'm John Dioso, the editor of Ad Age Studio 30. In a moment, we'll meet today's guests, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. Now, to participate in the Q&A portion of the webcast, all you have to do is type your question into the Ask a Question text area and then click the send button. You may submit the questions at any time during this webcast, and we'll address as many as time permits after our prepared remarks. Now, today we're being joined by Matthew Kramer, who's the head of brand investment at Media.Monks, Kelechi Nwankola, the manager of the Neurolab at Mindshare, and Charlie Weiss, the senior vice president and head of strategy and business development, EDO. But first, I'd like to turn it over to Peter Crowfoot, the vice president of business development, agencies and brands at Wurl. Pete, take it away.
Thanks, John, and it's an honor and privilege to be speaking with you today. Thank you to everybody in the audience who took time to come to sit with our panel. And as John mentioned, we're going to explore, and I'm the Vice President of Business Development of Agencies and Brands here at Wurl, and we are going to explore the role of emotions in contextual targeting in CTV. As more dollars start to pour into this space, there are absolute challenges that we have as both marketers and also audiences to connecting to the right content and programming, as well as having ads that are personalized and connect with them. And so emotions are going to become much more prevalent in terms of the next evolution of contextual advertising in CTV. And the reason that is if you look at the data, capturing more attention, CTV is capturing more attention than any other channel. And they continue to have an outsized impact on a brand awareness, purchase intent. And as more fast channels or ad-supported content becomes available, attention becomes much more important. The majority of CTV inventory and or programming is in the largest screen in a non-skippable environment. So it's crucial that we create the right attention and make sure that not only do you understand where your customers are, but actually have the right timing in place to show a personalized message. And attention, as we know, also drives sales. It also drives mental ability. I don't know how many of you in the audience have had the experience where maybe you're watching content like The English Patient, for example, or something very, very sad, and all of a sudden you receive a happy ad. That can create what we would call negative attention, not showing the consumer where, we're acknowledging where they are in their emotional journey. And as human beings, we are wired for emotion and to have response. And so making sure that you understand not only where your audiences are, but where they are to receive that message and what emotional state they're in is really important. And if you don't understand that or start thinking about how to do that, a brand's competitor will, and we're seeing a lot of impressive results when we're focusing on emotion. And the whole idea is timing. So unlike linear and CTV, you know where your audiences are, but one of the challenges due to walled gardens, fragmentation, is how do we actually know what the right moment is? How do we have control over the placement of where that ad shows up? And when you understand how to, and specifically using generative AI to understand the emotions and the content that viewer is watching and the emotions contained in the ad, when you marry those two things, it drives performance. And you can either drive negative attention, and that occurs when your ad gets attention, but your brand is negatively impacted because the ad feels disruptive, or you can earn positive attention that sparks engagement, brand, and more interest. We also find that when testing this and working to emotion, we find that there's a need to not have lessen the frequency, which also boosts cost per engagement and other performance parameters. And I'd be remiss to say, why we're all here today. If I didn't say why we're all here today, we've been working with this wonderful group of panelists, basically in partnership over the last few months to think about a new way to approach contextual advertising and targeting on CTV. And we released this product 2 months ago. It's called Brand Discovery. And it's a CTV advertising solution that allows for the ad to be precisely matched with the emotion and context of the programming in real time. And we see this as a new way to revolutionize contextual targeting to help grow this industry. And we're going to talk a little bit about what we've discovered. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John.
Great, thanks for that, Pete. And let's bring everybody back on screen. Let's meet them in person for the first time. Let's reintroduce them. So first we have Matthew Kramer, who's the head of brand investment at Media.Monks. And then we have Kelechi Nwankwola, who's the manager of the Neurolab and Mindshare. And last but not least, Charlie Weiss, the senior vice president and head of strategy and business development at Media. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Great to have you all. All right, let's dive into the discussion. And actually, before we do that, a quick reminder, please send in questions. To do that, just enter your question in the Ask a Question text area and then send it in, and we'll get to them as soon as we're done with our group discussion. So let's get into it. Let's start with addressing the title of the webinar, which is the role of emotions in contextual targeting in CTV. We've already seen some comments from the audience about the differences, the vast differences in attention. So we can dive into that as well. But, contextual targeting in CTV isn't new, but it sounds like emotions are introducing a new approach to how it's done. So, Kelechi, why don't you take this one first, then Pete, maybe you can weigh in, and anybody else can weigh in as they see fit. Why emotions? What role do emotions play in understanding the whole consumer?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think for me, it's really simple, right? We're talking about context, but the thing that's been missing so far is what about the context of where the person is, the audience member, right? And so there's basically this idea that these people are bringing to your particular stimulus, their histories, their mindsets, their different kinds of emotions. And that's context that really needs to be accounted for if we don't want to leave a lot of alpha on the table, right? We have this ability nowadays to ingest new data signals, ingest new understanding of where consumers are and where they're playing, and use that to be even more personalized and ultimately more effective. We know from the science really that, emotions, mindsets, identity, all of those are major inputs into decision making. And then, also from like your everyday life that depending on where your emotion is, where you are, context, that's going to have a big difference in how you're responding to even the same piece of information. In fact, like at the Neurolab, we've done a few, initial tests taking into account emotional context. And we've seen massive increases, up to 3 times increases in things like brand recall and purchase intent, just by accounting for emotional context and where we expect the consumer to be when they see that particular piece of ad. So, my perspective here is that even though people are kind of turning back towards contextual targeting out of necessity and out of changes to the ecosystem, the real reason contextual is evolving is because of opportunity. There's a real opportunity to kind of reframe and push forward the conversation about what context is and take into account not only where you're showing up, but where the consumer is.
Pete, emotions, again, obviously, when you think about the whole consumer, you think about not just what their actions are, what their patterns are, but who they are as human beings. So emotions obviously play a big part of that. My follow-up question would be, why, but also how do you measure that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I agree with a lot of what Kelechi said, and I want to add on to that. Consumers want to be seen as human beings, right? We're all human beings. Everyone on this call is a consumer. And in our industry, I think we're constantly talking about the right ad, the right person, the right time. But I think that the conversation is, a better need to understand what right is. What is actually the right moment? And I think with generative AI, I think with some of the advancements in targeting, we're able to get to that to some degree of like understanding where that consumer is, and finding that right moment is really about understanding the context of where those consumers are in their buying path, and then creating moments. Because I think all great advertising has measurement, has great data to inform where to target, but it also has the ability to tell a story, to resonate, to connect to where that person is, to create that positive attention. And as humans, I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, we're wired to be emotionally involved in that content. And I think the ads should evoke the emotion to where they are. And swinging from one emotion created by the content to another created by the ad can be part of why some TV ads feel so disruptive. So if advertisers want to create positive brand experiences, I think, it's intuitive that context should matter. So that's first and foremost. And as an industry, we need to stop talking just about the data and the technology. It's only as good as the messages that we're bringing and how we're showing up for the consumer. Now, measurement can be a couple of different things. I think there's been a lot of talk in our industry about the collapse of the funnels. So you have upper funnel metrics, right? I think of it as outcomes. And I think you'll hear from some other panelists that they're going to dive into that a little bit deeper. I know that Charlie has a definite POV on that, but it's about driving outcomes. And whether that's the top of the funnel, the middle, the consideration, right? We know that regardless of where that is in that funnel, that we can actually affect using emotion KPIs versus when you're not using emotion. And we've had some pretty interesting data around that. So I think measurement is important. And then it's what I think the other question is actually, what are we measuring, right? And getting into that. So from Wurl's perspective, that's our point of view.
Got it. All right, and I'm going to paraphrase from Poltergeist and ask Matthew Kramer to come back into the light. Matt, are you there?
I am here. Can you not see me?
We can't see you, but we hear your beautiful voice. So until you figure that part out, I've got a question for you, and maybe you'll turn on the lights on your side. So we've been talking a lot about. We started talking about emotions. The argument is that emotions play a role in driving attention on CTV. What are some of the important considerations here in terms of how attention is actually defined?
Yeah, my camera's on my side, so if there's an issue with that, I don't know if someone else can help with it. Look, I think we've been talking about attention for a long time, and I would say that attention has become part of the currency in certain cases. Working with partners like T-Vision, Adelaide, et cetera. But I think the one thing that we were really excited to test at Media.Monks was to take that one step further and to say, obviously, if you don't gain the attention of the consumer, you have no ability to give them your message, for them to receive the message, and therefore to sell whatever product or service you're trying to sell. But by optimizing towards attention alone, you might be doing yourself a disservice, right? Because what if you're optimizing towards negative attention and not positive attention, right? So negative attention will actually hurt your brand, right? It might be a misalignment, and therefore it leaves you with, not a great image of that brand. So we wanted to make sure that we were optimizing towards positive attention. And I know we'll get into the results later, but we certainly saw that making the alignment between the emotional resonance of your creative plus the same emotional resonance of the content in which we were sponsoring led to positive attention and therefore positive results.
And thank you for stepping back into the light. You've improved our emotions incredibly.
Glad I'm back. Sorry.
Good to have you. All right. Now, so we've started to talk about the opportunity for emotions to drive positive attention and thus performance on CTV. Let's switch gears to talking about measurement, as Pete had brought up before. Charlie, before we dive into how emotions are actually measured, let's take a step back and discuss more broadly. What are the challenges that you hear from the industry in measuring on CTV today?
Yeah, and great setup from Pete, Kalichi, and Matt on that. So a lot of the difficulties we see are around, I would say, issues that have been haunting measurement for years. They're just more prevalent with CTV as a growth channel, where there's a huge amount of fragmentation. There's a large reliance on last touch or last click or whatever you want to call it, attribution. And basically you have a lot of buyers that are saying, when I'm buying programmatically, where I'm buying CTV, I can't get my KPIs to work for this, or I can't get my KPIs to work for that. You have some buyers complaining it's too expensive. You have some publishers complaining it's not expensive enough or it's too cheap. And really what we want to do at EDO is focus on things that are really in the control of both the marketer and in the control of the publisher or the company that's providing data targeting, like Pete and AppLovin and Wurl. So what we've done is really focus on the mid-funnel, where if you go on something like a social platform, or if you buy programmatic display inventory, you typically don't ask, what was my reach and frequency? You typically ask, what was my outcome? What was my result, right? And really what we wanted EDOs to be able to benchmark and measure that performance. We've been doing it in linear for years. We've been doing it in CTV since 2020. And the idea is exactly the same. It really touches on the emotional part and why we're very excited about the partnership with Wurl, in that there's a ability to understand if this was an exciting moment in a game, did this lead to improved ad performance? If there was a exciting or type of moment in content, to your point, positive emotion, did this lead to improved ad performance? So it's really what we've been doing it for years. It's just focusing on a different way of looking at it. And when we look at our data, when we look at outcomes, we want everything we do to be predictive of an end outcome, not necessarily the end outcome itself, which is largely out of the control of the marketer, out of the control of the publisher, out of the control of the company providing targeting. It's really a correlation and a predictive outcome for sales, market share, and other KPIs.
Okay, so we've looked a little bit about what the challenges are and also what we want to come out and what the output should be. Let's talk about how that actually works. How do you actually measure emotion? I mean, I'm picturing an EKG with little sensors on people's brains.
No, you're not. Well, I'll let Pete dive in if they actually did that, but they've developed a very sophisticated way of classifying different emotions. I believe there's 24 different emotional categories that they look to target, whether it's anger, happiness, sadness, excitement, etc. Right? And from that, we receive data from Wurl to understand how they've classified an ad. And from there, we can match it to, did this drive someone to search for a product? Or did this cause someone to visit the site of a product, right? So for us, while we've done a lot to analyze, live TV content or CTV content, for this, it's really Wurl's secret sauce as to how they can identify different emotions. Then it's up to EDO to help them classify which emotions for which brands will drive the most or the highest level of outcomes for brands that they work with.
Great. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that from Pete, but maybe we can, maybe the best way to that is kind of illustrating some examples of how it's done in action. So have brands started testing emotional targeting, and how have you been able to measure it? Pete, you want to take it, then maybe Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first thing is using a generative AI. We are one of the largest operators of fast channels within CTV in the world. And so we have a lot of programming and metadata that we have. And so our generative AI uses something called the Plečnik wheel of emotions, which Charlie was just mentioning. They're basically 8 primary emotions. And this famous psychologist, William Plečnik, back in the 80s, developed this model. So we know using generative AI, we're able to score the emotional resonance of content and programming at any given time. So we know which emotions are contained, and there are 8 primary emotions with 3 different intensity levels, so high, medium, and low. And basically, when if you multiply that or matrices that out, it's too many different emotions for me to account. But what it does is our scoring looks at all of the human emotion that in combination that's going to be available in that content, and we score it. And what we look at is also the creative itself, the video, and what we determine is what are the emotions contained there. And that's where, right, you have the timing and emotional resonance is the trick, so that you've got an ad emotionally that's going to match where you are in that journey for the customer. And the brand advertiser is going to be able to have creative that's going to target that. And the way we measure it on a couple of different ways. We'll measure impressions. We look at we'll measure genre, and then a number of other things on the axis that we do measure. And then we partner with folks like EDO, as Charlie mentioned, to look at what segments are driving specific action. And what we can say, this is us grading our own homework and others grading our homework. We consistently see 2 to even up to 7x. Matt can speak to that a little bit in terms of increase in either awareness or performance that's being driven. And that's what's really exciting. So, it mirrors our internal results when we measure using a partner like EDO to think about outcomes, as well as like when they actually grade the homework or a Kantar as well. So it's a really exciting space. And I think, with all of the evolution and updates to generative AI, we're going to be able to innovate quite a bit over the next 18 months with our partners, and we're really excited about that.
Matt, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so we did some testing of this emotional resonance, optimization, and we had a client who was in the financial sector, and they had to be very careful about what they could do in terms of like manipulating their creative. So they couldn't do things like dynamic creative optimization, for example, and change the creative easily because of the restrictions for that sector. So, and we also wanted to test positive attention versus just optimizing towards attention itself. And what we found was that we found that there was really positive results for full funnel, right? Not just for lower funnel, but for full funnel. So we found that for brand metrics, we saw double digits increase in terms of brand awareness, favorability, things like that. But then also to what Charlie was saying, this particular client, like many, has been struggling to figure out how to make CTV work for them, even for lower funnel metrics, right? And when you're measuring that just through your DSP, they're using last touch attribution, right? And so often what's happening is the credit is not being applied to those who actually drove, all of that response. So what we found by partnering with EDO is that we saw a 200% increase in engagement, right? And engagement in this case was defined as branded search volume as well as site visitation. So we were able to prove full funnel performance for CTV by optimizing against positive attention, which I think was amazing.
Charlie.
Yeah, and the example from this, it's really very similar to what you find with if there's live sports and the game is close, right? There's a lot of attention or positive attention to this, right? Or if it's certain content that, speaks to a brand, emotional content around the holidays. So we're thrilled that we're able to measure it, but it's really just an extension of brand suitability. It's just a different flavor of it. So we're very excited to be partnered with it, but it's really just I'll say advancement of what brands have been doing for years. It's just harnessing a new way of doing it that's more forward facing.
John, I'd like to add on to another comment that Charlie just made, right? So we're talking about emotion. So in the bid stream where publishers are passing data, it's typically at a program level. And so we also are able to detect at a scene level, not just emotion, but genre and brand safety. And so I think the pivot, when we talk to buyers quite a bit and others, is this audience, are we doing audience extension? Are we, we know where our audiences are, and that's what drives performance. We're taking that one step further and drilling down to say, what about at that scene level? And taking that to understand who they are as a human being to that next level and thinking about the KPIs that you're trying to drive. So it is context, it is brand safety, and it is genre that actually drives what that action. So you think about emotion to outcomes, and that's how we're starting to think of it, just other than generic bid stream data that comes down, because oftentimes it's misclassified. And so let's say that, I'm an advertiser and I'm targeting the, comedy, The Office. Well, is The Office a comedy, or is it a romance comedy? And it depends on the scenes. You can have multiple genres within a program, and then you can have multiple scenes that look safe, well lit. Great, I'm going to put my ad there. Shrek is a great example, right? Family adventure. That seems like a great audience to buy. But if you're a CPG, like a Pillsbury, Sara Lee, or we can go right down the list, do you want your ad next to when Lord Farquhar is choking the gingerbread man? So you can get these false positives and vice versa. And it also, what we found when we talk about measurement, is one of the things that, I was talking with Matt about this, that we discovered is there was an emotion when we were, the audience was millennial moms. We actually found out that high anger was something that drove them to, to search and or be driven to find out more from the website. And so we get these little insights that we haven't thought about before, and then we can create playbooks to take those forward around what emotions should be targeted. So we're still in early goings, and it's really exciting as we're all as a collective group trailblazing here some of the insights that we're beginning to see. But for anyone in the audience, I think it is thinking about having that end KPI in mind, and then thinking about how emotion, brand safety, and genre at the scene level can actually drive those outcomes. And that's the pivot from how we've done things before, only looking at the program or only wanting the show. And that's new to us too, right? We've discovered this as we've developed and worked with these wonderful partners to do this.
I love that. But let's be honest. I mean, who hasn't taken a gingerbread man and like chomped off its head and pretending they're Godzilla? Come on.
Yeah, right. Directionally, I think that's our argument. But
Whatever brands want to advertise around that, I'm open to it. I'll sign up for that. So, I love that. That was a really great segue. Thank you, Pete. And it kind of leads into the next question really well, because it talks about the different capabilities to be able to measure knowledge or notice these trends, identify these types of trends, and the type of marketing strategies that can build out of that. How does AI, you mentioned it before, but maybe we can do a little bit of a deeper dive in how does AI actually play into, one, noticing these trends, two, tracking them, categorizing them, cataloging them, but then also activating on them. Can you talk a little bit about that? Maybe Kelechi could weigh in.
Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah. And then Kelechi.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
It's just how does AI really play into all of it? I mean, you mentioned all these great capabilities that have come out through all the work you've been doing, the data you've been collecting, but obviously AI is helping you kind of connect the dots. One, to identify the trends and catalog them, right, in real time and as quickly as they come up, and be able to build a massive database to be able to activate on something. Then also to actually activate on this marketing, create marketing strategies out of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the first part of it is, like you mentioned, cataloging the emotions contained in the content, what's happening. But there's also latency, and something when we are able to do around genre, brand safety, as well as emotion, we're proud because the way the fast channels work. There's no latency with that, so we can do that in a live way. And what that does is the AI continues to learn. So AI is great, but it continues to scan the programming. It continues to learn about what's working and having deeper insights. And I think the next thing, and I think this is upon us as an industry, and I want to press this, is because we still are in early goings, is creating playbooks for that. Right. So I think some of the playbooks, some are further along with how to use contextual and CTV and thinking about emotion. You can take the learnings from that and the learnings from the creative analysis. So again, back to the campaign Matt and I were discussing is anger. Where did that come from, and how can that be applied? How can we cover other emotions that we might not have considered? That's something that we can do really well. And I think the challenge for this industry body is then how do we start creating playbooks based on different KPIs and profiles of the type of advertiser? Is it performance? Is it awareness? Are you trying to drive incremental sales? And again, I think that's a really exciting area that AI can help perform as we get deeper insights and results. So Kelechi or Charlie, I'm sure you have an opinion on this.
Yeah, I think yes to everything you've said so far. From my perspective, I think the ability to measure emotion or look at emotion in particular ways has always existed, or has existed at least since like 2017. We've had biometrics, we've had facial coding, we've had heart rate variabilities. All of these were inputs, and they helped marketers understand how consumers are feeling or predict how consumers might feel. The difference now with artificial intelligence is that we have a way to make that precision rigorous, consistent, and overall scalable, right? So Peter's talking about being able to do this at speed of fast channels. We were not able to do that before. And on top of that, because deep learning more generally, its real strength is being able to structure these really highly dimensional abstract spaces like emotion. What it can do for us is pull out these patterns like Peter's talking about anger versus joy versus et cetera, that I feel like an individual person would have a lot of trouble being able to pull out or even formalize for themselves because emotion is so nuanced. So for me, the way AI is driving the core of this, because it's helping us identify patterns and helping us structure and identify things that we can bring out and scale to other people at a level that wasn't previously available. So it's going to be really exciting, I think, at least from my perspective, to see what else comes out of that and what else we learn about the interplay of emotions and content moving forward.
Charlie?
Sure. So for us, it really is just building on a lot of what we've been doing for years, which is measuring as much activity as possible to have something that's truly predictive of an outcome. And AI is really something that, when built on top of this, it just improves the technology, or it improves everything you're already doing. So Kelechi's point, it's kind of going from, all right, we've known that this content is classified as X or is classified as Y, but now you can have precision type targeting at scale and be confident in that because you're using AI to identify it. So for us, we view it as an enhancement to our present products and the ability to provide more predictive or a higher stability in our outcomes. So yes, we think it's a huge opportunity. And when applied to emotions, it does the exact same thing.
Right. I'd like to wrap up this roundtable part with a look toward the future, and then we'll get to the audience questions in a minute. But the upfronts, it's always good. I'm glad that we did this webcast today, because the upfronts just wrapped, and obviously so much of what's happening right now, but also with an eye toward the future, it's very top of mind, right? So I'd like to ask you all, where do you think contextual is headed? And what do you see as the future of contextual targeting? How it will evolve, maybe with an eye toward, if you've heard anything at the upfronts, if these were discussions that you heard, or not, just, whatever your predictions are, where it's headed. Why don't we start with Matt? Let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think, AI is obviously going to power contextual relevance and in terms of, targeting as well. I think that, the onus on all of us to sort of look at media plus creative plus emotion is going to be more and more important as we move forward. The one thing I took away from the upfronts was that, we're past the inflection point in terms of how people are watching the largest screen, right? If you looked at who had some of the most impressive, presentations last week, they were coming from the endemic CTV players. Not to say that Disney and all the others weren't impressive, but the streaming wars might be going on, but I think the viewership war is almost won now. And we're going to be living in a world where you have a pretty even split between how people are watching CTV versus linear. And so what we're able to do on that CTV screen, where we know that we have less impressions or less opportunities to get in front of them, because so much of that inventory is actually not ad supported, right? Let's remember that. That means we have less opportunities to speak and give the message to the potential consumers. So we need to make that message work a lot harder. And so using AI, using contextual, using emotion, I think are all ingredients that we're going to have to use in order to make that message hit harder.
That's great, thanks. And I'm sure a lot of the advertisers and marketers in there are just saying, what parts aren't being why are there no ads? So those are the ones we need to target. Show them to us. All right, next one. Kelechi, why don't you take it?
Yeah, I think I've been harping on this from the beginning, but for me, it's like this idea of let's broaden the idea of what context means, right? Context doesn't just mean like where you're showing up. It means understanding where the audience member is coming from. So when I look to the future of contextual, it's going to be, contextual kind of has a chip on its shoulder, right? Because it has to kind of prove itself as reaching parity with a lot of the other targeting methods that are currently available. And so that means it needs to innovate and ingest new data sources so that we can start to infer more and become more personalized overall. So I see AI being a big part of it because it's able to identify those weak data signals. But I also think the onus is on us, and it's part of the reason we're having this conversation, to spread understanding of emotion, the power of emotion, in moving contextual forward.
Yeah,
Charlie.
I think contextual is as relevant as ever. Every one of the upfronts, while they talked about data targeting and audience capabilities, they were showcasing premium content, whether you're an extremely data-driven streaming first publisher or you're a convergent publisher. In terms of this being the year of streaming, that's over. I think it's just, this is what television is at this point. The Paris Olympics will be broadcast on live linear, on Peacock, on a mobile phone, anywhere that you can watch a high impact or a high impact advertising event. You're going to be able to watch that with the ad attached to it. So yeah, it's definitely the year of streaming, or not the year of streaming, where it's basically just become, this is just what television is. And I think content will continue to play a huge role in getting eyeballs, and the ability to understand that content and apply the ads to it, which is something that brands and TV studios and TV networks have been trying to do for years. And the more advanced you are at doing that, the better an ad platform you're going to have. So yeah, I think content and contextual targeting is here to stay.
Great. And Pete, I'm glad that you brought up genre before. I love that. It was something you kind of highlighted, and it did kind of highlighted what Charlie just mentioned about content being such a focus of the upfronts this year. And I'd love to hear your take on where you see contextual is headed with that, with content in mind.
Yeah, I think consumers are overwhelmed with content. And think about, right, when we have a whole other side of our business that deals with premium content publishers, they're always striving to make their content available or discoverable. So, right, that becomes the question in a sea of with a lot of signal noise. How do we separate ourselves from that? And I'm going to take a slightly different point of view than the panelists, because they are correct. I think there's a step before that. And I was listening to Sean Downey, the president of sales and global partnerships at Google, at Possible talk about when he talks to CMOs and marketers, they're asking him, well, how do we develop an AI strategy? And I think the question Sean posed back and smartly, in a really smart way, which is actually the question is, how does AI drive your business strategy? And in contextual, I think it's better understanding of how AI can drive better outcomes and what strategies that you could be using to develop, one, better surfacing of content, and number two, making sure that with the emotions, with the other factors that I mentioned, like brand safety and genre, and then how do you actually create those positive experiences? And so, as businesses go along, that the standard thinking, the way contextual has been done, I think will get revolutionized in the next 18 months in a way that has never happened. And I think it's incumbent upon brands and agencies and technology partners as well to start helping our partners think about how that AI can drive the various levers and tactics to drive better outcomes. And that's a win for our industry. It's a win for agencies and brands. And more importantly, it is a win for the customer. And with the death of third-party cookies, we don't have that problem.
Which is going to happen one day, someday.
Yeah, someday, right? I understand.
My prince will go.
In my previous employer, I obviously understand. But this isn't a break. This is a really great time to just it's inevitable that cookies are going to deprecate. But in the display ecosystem, consumers have made their voice very loud and clear. They want their privacy protected. They expect personalized experiences. I mean, if any of you ever have teenagers, watch them in a non-skippable environment trying to watch fast channels, and the ad doesn't map what they do. They're gonna hit the eject button and go to YouTube, go somewhere else to find the content that they're looking for. So I think as an industry, we need to realize that all the customer research shows that if it's not personalized, they're less likely to purchase. They're less likely to consider. And so that's what's, I think, the future of AI is, how does that drive business strategy? And it's just a really great time to be in this business. It's almost like the Wild West, and we get to shape it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for a great discussion. Great look forward to what to look for in contextual targeting. It's time to get to audience questions. And just a reminder, if you haven't had a chance yet, to participate in the Q&A, just type your question in the Ask a Question text area, then click the send button. But we've got a bunch, and hopefully we'll get to them all before the end. And the first one, actually, there are a couple that kind of are similar, so I want to ask them together, and any and all could ask one or both parts of it. And it's the first one was, is CTV becoming more of a performance channel, and do brand metrics still play a role? And the related question is, could you tell us more about bottom of funnel measurement for CTV? Not positive intent and consideration, but actual purchase event conversion measurement as the look of success. So who wants to take CTV as a performance channel, basically? Charlie.
Yeah, I think it's both a brand and performance channel. I think the importance of content is obviously critical, but every brand is going to go out there and say, what did this result in, right? It's no secret that the fastest growing channel besides CTV is retail media networks, and they provide performance with every single ad that they run. So I think brands are going to look for as much brand building and making sure that they're reaching the target audience by a common amount of reach and frequency, as much as they're going to say, well, what happened as a result of my spend on X? So it's definitely becoming as much a performance channel as it is a branding channel.
And, Matt, before you mentioned how one of the things, like maybe it's, people are not considering it enough, whether you want to call it full funnel, measurement or top of funnel, that still is important. And that does, I think it was you, Brett, or it might have been Pete talking about last touch attribution. It was you who brought up last touch attribution. That doesn't discount CTV or any TV as a full funnel, especially top of funnel, brand marketing channel. But it should still be attributed to that. The performance and the sale at the end, or the conversion at the end, should still be attributed to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one, I agree that we can collapse we can use CTV to collapse the distance between someone learning about the brand and knowing the brand and trusting the brand and then purchasing from the brand. So that's kind of the idea of when I say full funnel for CTV, that's what we're trying to do, right? But saying that the largest screen is really good at producing brand is not a bad thing, right? Without a strong brand, you don't have strong leads and you don't have strong sales, right? So I think it's really important that we don't sort of overshadow the fact that CTV, and television in general, over decades and decades and decades of measuring this, we know that it's the strongest brand tool we have because of the sight, sound, and motion, and quite frankly, the emotion that's tied to it, right? But the idea then to be able to say we can make television more accountable, to be looking at that mid and lower funnel is really important. And I think partnering with guys like EDO helps you do that. And if you rely only on the reporting that you're going to get from, a DSP, and I'm not trying to pick on the DSPs, they're a wonderful tool and have brought a lot of efficiency to the marketplace. But the reality is that they are mainly, scoring everything off of a last touch attribution. I mean, one thing I would say here is that, media mix has always been important, right? And so we've always known that that every piece of media, every channel in that media mix has a role to play. The question is, how do we get all of those channels to do more for the bottom line, right? So I know I kind of went in a lot of different directions there, but for me, I feel like all media is performance. It's just, am I driving brand performance? Am I driving consideration performance? Am I driving sales performance? Or am I driving all of those all at the same time?
I can't think of a better analog for that than, think about the way that everyone, not just, our kids and, young people are watching TV, always with at least one other screen in hand, so what those are literally two different types of, devices and channels, if you want to think of it that way. You're on social, you're in digital, but you're also watching on the big screen on your TV, which is also connected usually digitally as well. Pete, did you want to weigh in, or Khalid?
Yeah. I can go real quick. Short attention span theater is what I call it. So, right, I'm watching something on multiple surfaces. And I agree that it's, with Matt, it's driving performance. So I think depending on your KPI, emotions have a seat at the table. So specifically, whoever asked the question, I love this around, could you be a little bit more granular? We've had instances where we've had clients basically trying to, you have consumer pullback and spend in certain sectors. of our industry. And they have stores, and what they're looking to do is drive incremental sales, and they're looking to drive incremental foot traffic. So if you do some A/B testing, you use emotion and don't use emotion. And when I saw these results, I had to ask my team twice, like, is this for real? We've seen north of 50% or a 40 to 50% increase in incremental sales as well as incremental foot traffic, which is really impressive. And again, that's doing A/B testing to look at that. So yes, I think you can get, once you understand again where that audience are in relationship to the programming that they're viewing, that emotional journey, by just adding that layer, we can drive quite a bit of performance. And then same thing, middle and upper funnel for consideration, et cetera. And I think we have more work to do in that area to better understand, which levers around the combination of emotion and other features actually drive that. And I think that's something we'll be learning together as an industry as we go throughout the next 18 months.
And then really quickly, I'll just kind of bring the neuro perspective to why we expect that to work. You know what I mean? And it's because like emotion has a really interesting dual, I guess, use case within the brain, right? So things that we find emotional, we find emotionally resonant, we not only pay more attention to them, but we also tend to remember them for longer. And then when it comes to the actual moment of decision making, we weigh those things higher if we have some kind of emotional investment in them, for example. So like if you think for yourself, you try to remember, me personally, I don't really remember what I ate last week, but if I remember the last time I hung out with a friend, or if I remember, like what the last emotional thing for me, those things stick with you for long periods of time. So you have this kind of 3-factor increase whenever you're targeting emotion in terms of people actually seeing the content, remembering it for a long time, and then using what they remember about it as a cue to themselves that they value it. So all of these things kind of work together, which is why targeting emotion ends up being a little bit of upper funnel and a little bit of lower funnel as well. It impacts all of those metrics.
That's great. And I think one of our viewers predicted that you were going to talk about emotions. I'm going to follow up on that for you, Kelechi, specifically. And they just wanted you to clarify that when you refer to emotional context, you mean the emotion that the listener starts or the viewer starts with when they see an ad or content, or their reaction to the content. What are you referring to when you're talking about emotional content?
I think it's both, honestly. I think Peter has talked about this so far. It's really about the journey, right? So it's about understanding, where they are when they start, and then giving the right combination to where they start, if that makes sense. So one of the studies I think I was referencing before was, we had an ad that we kind of had tested out very consistently. We knew that it elicited joy consistently. And so we have an understanding of what it elicits, but now we want to think about what context or where respondents are likely to be when they see it. And so by modulating that, where we're going to place it, then we can give the right kind of combination, either like resonance, so have them be happy before they see the happy ad, or maybe have them be afraid and have this happy ad be like kind of the balance and be that much more salient because it's a contrast to that, right? Sometimes that brings about negative attention, but sometimes it can actually provide more positive attention there. So it is about kind of the pairing of where they are and then what the ad is likely to elicit that ultimately ends up driving outcomes.
And that's just part of the metrics that you use to measure, right? Is you actually do survey how what they're feeling as they're entering whatever content they're viewing, and then their reaction to it, correct?
Exactly. So that's something we've been doing internally for a long time. But one of the reasons we're working with Wurl right now is that we want to leverage their brand discovery system to do this at scale and test that out with clients and make sure to kind of repeat the strong success we saw with our initial testing.
Right. Okay. The next question I want to get to is one that I think I've been hearing ever since somebody first plugged the TV into the internet, which is, what advice do you have for brands who have shied away from CTV advertising and are found it challenging to demonstrate performance KPIs in the past? I feel like, God, we've been talking about this for so long, but I think it still is relevant. So I'd love you guys. Who wants to take that?
I can start that off. I think if you're just looking at it, I was just working on a deck this morning that talks to this, so it's fresh in my memory. I think, if you look at it purely from a reach perspective, right? Again, can I actually reach the person with my message, right? That's kind of the first thing that you got to do, right? And what I said earlier was that it is true. We're straddling between two worlds right now, right? The linear world and the IPTV world. And if you're only focused on linear, you are really hurting your reach, and you're probably blowing out your frequency if you're spending quite a bit in that channel. So I think just from a reach perspective, you need to be there. And I think, on the CTV side, you have the ability to buy that programmatically. You have the ability to do it against advanced audiences. You can do it as PG deals to save on, the data and the taxes of DSPs. So there's a way of bringing some efficiency there. But bringing CTV into the fold will bring a lot more accountability to your campaign. I'm not suggesting that for most campaigns you only focus on CTV and forget about linear, particularly if you have anyone that you're trying to reach, let's say 30 or 40 years old or older. We know that they over-index for linear, but certainly I feel like just from a reach perspective, you sort of need to be there.
Right. Does anybody else want to take that? Charlie?
Sure. Okay. You want to go?
Sure. I just very, very quickly, what my guidance is test and iterate and fail fast. So, right, in terms of, because CTV is just one part of the conversation in terms of how media is planned. So I think taking budget to test and iterate the impact that emotion has on CTV, and then compare and contrast to your regular contextual targeting and audience strategies, and then test how emotion might drive additional not only insights but performance. And so I think it needs to be looked at holistically. And we're a big fan here and with our clients, like everybody, our partners here on this webinar today, are willing to test and willing to fail fast and willing to discover new insights, and then figuring out how does that drive the performance or better ROAS into a media investment.
Yes, I definitely test and iterate, understand what you want from the channel. Is this a replacement for another channel? Is it a complement for another channel? Is the KPI, we touched a lot about this, is it the end sale, which is the exact same thing you're doing potentially in another channel, or is the goal to drive brand awareness as much as performance? So I would have a checklist based on what your brand is looking to accomplish, and then really make sure that you accomplish the top items on that checklist. But yeah, that would be my advice.
Another viewer asked maybe a little bit more explanation about the genre and the way that you're categorizing things, Pete, there. So the question is, does Wurl's AI tech contextualize on a scene-by-scene basis what's happening in order to identify emotion, or is it overall emotion by title?
It's scene. Yeah, a really great question. It is not just by title; it's scene by scene. So we understand closest to the ad break what emotions are contained, and what then basically our AI is looking at. Whether it's audio, video, using Plotnick's wheel of emotion, we understand both at the scene level what the genre is, as well as what the emotion contains, so that can be more appropriate. And that's what differentiates us, because of the way, in terms of being the back end technology for a lot of premium publishers and streamers, our AI and with that metadata understands that very specifically.
Right. So Prison Mike in The Office, comedy, Jim and Pam kissing at casino night, romance.
Yes. Romance, yes, correct. And then there's also where, we have, news is a very hot topic. Lots of brands don't want to, be after tragic stories, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that there aren't stories there. So, right, we can also, especially in local news, surface moments that would be appropriate, right? If you watch an uplifting news report about something in your community, we're able to detect, hey, that's a high joy emotion. That's a great place to talk to that person with an ad, and also help you understand, this isn't a well-lit, safe place. I shouldn't be here. So that I think that there are, again, as each campaign that we're running, and as we're building these strategies out and looking at KPIs, we're learning every single time, and we'll continue to do so.
Wow, that's amazing that you brought up the news. So what is it more a matter of feeding that data to advertisers to let them know you're missing out on you may be missing out on opportunities to reach the right consumers at these right moments? And then what is the turnaround time? So it's literally, okay, we should look for that. And then by using
It's-
your platform, are they able to, Matt brought up dynamic creative optimization before,
Yeah.
able to kind of activate on something? How fast is that? How
It's
fast?
simple. It's almost scary how simple it is. We get the URL for the video, and then we're able within the same day to run our model to look at what emotions are contained there, and then we make targeting recommendations. And that's not to say that an advertiser or an agency has to follow that recommendation. There might be other tactics there, but we do find when they follow, when understand where those emotions are contained, and then what similar emotions are involved with content, we see great performance.
Right. So news is not just for pharma ads for old people.
That's linear television. No.
What's linear? I don't even know what that means.
Linear still has a seat at the table.
Question.
Yeah, I don't want to get a bunch of flame mails after this. No. Linear still has a seat at the table.
All right, this is a good one. Again, it's a very basic one. I think it's an important one, though. Have you seen high correlation between consideration and positive emotional results? I think that's what the point of this entire webcast is. What brands or categories has seen the most? This is a very good one. What brands or category has seen the most positive results? So you talked a little bit about, I was making that joke about pharma ads, but then what are the other brands or industries that, could kind of leverage this emotional resonance in contextual advertising the most? Anybody, any and all of you could take that. Charlie.
Sure. Okay. So there's definitely brands that see improved results as a result of just emotion. So I'll just use, for instance, like automakers that advertise for electric vehicles, right, against an audience. It's typically advertising for something that's positive, something for the future, and it typically is featured during a high impact event like a live sports game. So yes, there's definitely instances of high emotions or positive emotions leading to improved results. In terms of specific brands or specific categories, I would say you have to advertise with Wurl to figure out which one's best suited for each brand. But there's definitely evidence from years of linear and now years of CTV that different types of emotions and different types of content drives improved outcomes and improved engagement. So yes, I don't want to dig in as to QSR should only do this and pharma should only do that. But yeah, I'd say it's test and learn, but there's definitely correlations there.
Well, that'll be part two. That'll be part 2 of this webcast. Any other final words from anybody?
No, just really appreciate everybody taking time out of their day. Please feel free to follow up with any of us if you have further questions or want to discuss sort of what's working and what's not.
All right. Well, great. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody out there for attending Ad Age's custom webcast sponsored by Wurl. As a reminder that you can view and listen to this presentation on demand using the same link that you used to attend today. And you'll receive an email as soon as our archive is ready. On behalf of our guests, Pete Crofit, Matt Kramer, Kalichi Nwankwola, and Charlie Weiss, I'm John Dios from Ad Age. See you next time. Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye. Thanks.
Yeah.